No, other way. There you go. There you go. And here, all I need to do is, are these buttons right here? Mm-hmm. Okay. Hello. We are now we'll be moving a little bit into thinking about all the planning and trying to put all that planning into what's going to be probably a very technical presentation from this point on. But I wanted to give you an overview of the land use actions which were certified by the Department of City Planning and are going to be starting the formal public review process very shortly. There is, as Kathy said, the Community Board is having a meeting on October 22nd, and that will be the first formal meeting under the City's Uniform Land Use Review process. And we're going to give you a sneak preview of the actions tonight. So there will be 4 actions that will be looked at under this process. And actually, let me just stop for a minute and just ask you, I'm going to be talking a lot about various zoning terms, and I don't know whether people are familiar with the New York City zoning resolution or not. So could people give me a sense? Assume that they're not. So if I go too fast or I go too slow, you'll let me know. But there's 4 land use actions that I'm going to talk about. The first is an amendment to the zoning map that relates to a portion of Roosevelt Island. The second is a zoning text amendment because if the New York City zoning resolution, really, if you think about it, it relates to how you build on a city that's been quite developed, how you build on a city that's been broken down into blocks and detached lots. This is, and it's usually thinking about how you're building residentially or commercially. This is going to be something new. It's going to be this exciting campus. So we're creating a zoning text amendment and a special district, which takes all of the goals for this campus and creates a set of zoning rules for the campus itself. There's also a city map amendment, which relates to the Loop Road, and finally there'll be a disposition of city-owned property. So I think let's start with the map itself. And now let me try this again. So the campus, this is Queensboro Bridge, the southern part of Roosevelt Island, and the campus will be in about this area here. The current zoning designation for the property is called an R72. And what that means is currently the zoning allows for residential development and allows for community facility development. And it allows for community facility development, which includes universities, to something called a floor area ratio of 6.5. And what that means is it tells you what the development potential is. You would take that 6.5 number, multiply it by the size of the development site, and that tells you how much development can exist on this, could be permitted. So looking at the site today, the zoning today actually allows for about 3.7 million square feet of development on the site of the Cornell campus. We're not in any way, that's more development than is contemplated. We think that the campus is going to be somewhere between 1.8 million and 2.1 million. So we don't need in any way to ask for more development potential or anything like that. But the current zoning does not allow for commercial use. And because of the goals of the campus to create this mixture of corporate co-location with the academic space, with the residential space, we need to change the zoning to allow for those uses. So the proposal would be to change this zoning from R72 to the area that's covered by the campus to a C45 district. That keeps the same development potential for community facility. It keeps the same maximum development potential, but what it will allow is for commercial to be introduced onto the site at an FAR of 3.4. So that's the main goal of the rezoning, one of the main goals. And the second is that the rezoning will also create something that will be called the Special Southern Roosevelt Island District. And that designation will allow us to create a new zoning text that's very specific to the area that's covered by the zoning. One thing I want to point out, you can kind of see, maybe you can see, this actually shows the Loop Road as it exists today. The zoning is going to extend beyond the boundaries of the Cornell campus and will go from the pier head line on one side to the pier head line on the other side. And that actually allows for future protection of the esplanade areas on either side of the campus. So we thought that was important. Okay. So the zoning text amendment is really the heart, and there's going to be a lot of slides on the text amendment. Overall, there's sort of the main goals. We'll be creating this new special district. We will be the text will be protecting the waterfront areas and preserving it for open space and recreational uses. There will be a development parcel, which will be the Cornell campus, and we'll have specific use, bulk, and parking controls for it, and we will be requiring the creation of publicly accessible open space be created and phased in as the development proceeds. Let's spend a little bit of time. The zoning, it's going to be Chapter 3 of Article 13 of the zoning resolution. And the first thing that the text does, it actually establishes the general purposes that are part of the special district. And they're very much the things that Kathy and Andrew and Colin have talked about. The goals is to create an academic and research campus, allowing for this mix of uses as part of the overall development. Create a network of publicly accessible open spaces that work with the buildings and work, with the island itself, to establish physical connections within Roosevelt Island and view corridors beyond Roosevelt Island. And I think most importantly, to really establish a flexible framework for innovative design to make sure that light and air comes into the campus, and really to create a zoning scheme that really applies to both a unique site and a unique use. This is not an easy picture to see, but what you're looking at is a map that will be part of the zoning text. It is an overlay of the area that's going to be rezoned. So this, again, the bridge is right here. This is the Cornell campus and the waterfront. And what it will do is the text will create a development parcel. That's the area that's going to be within the loop road, and it's the property that will be leased to Cornell and be part of the Cornell campus. And so most of the zoning controls that we'll be talking about will relate only to the development parcel. There's only one zoning control that's going to be created that relates to the waterfront areas that are not part of the development parcel, and that's this provision right here, Section 133.05. What that provision is going to say is that the waterfront areas are going to be limited to open waterfront recreational uses, and it will require that those areas remain open to the public except for between 6 and 10, between April 15th and October 31st, from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. for the remainder of the year. Now this is really what REAC will remain in control of the waterfront areas. It's what REAC's lease says for them to do, but this is basically a protection to assure that in the future that the controls that exist today that protect the waterfront and make sure that it's open to the public remain. Okay? So moving on to the development parcel, we're going to have some use controls that would be specific to the district, bulk regulations that will be specific to the district, parking controls because there's currently a parking requirement today that we'd like to see changed, and the requirements for publicly accessible open space. So for use. In general, the underlying use controls will apply. That will allow for commercial, for residential, and for community facility. The one additional use that will be allowed by the special district is an allowance for what's called a use group 17B research and testing labs. What these will be dry labs, but it's something that may be part of the academic space, and so it's an additional use that would be allowed by the zoning. For the bulk, and again, this is extremely technical, but what we'd be doing is making a few changes to the otherwise applicable bulk regulations. There's underlying zoning, there's this very sort of complicated way of establishing what the permitted
floor area is for residential use, that looks at the height of the building and the amount of open space and the overall, to establish the permitted FAR. What the text will do is establish a set amount, which is the same as what's permitted as the maximum under current zoning of 3.44 FAR. So we're being consistent with the maximum, but we're just making it very clear that that's what the number is. For those lab uses, we're putting a specific floor area number for that of 3.4, which is the same as what's allowed for commercial uses. So we'll be treating that as commercial uses. We'll be keeping the maximum permitted the same, and we won't be making any changes to community facility. Okay. What we are going to be looking at and imposing on the site are a series of lot coverage controls that change as you get farther, higher up on the site. Because what we really wanted to do was to make sure that you had an open campus, that there was lots of opportunities for open space. And so what we have established are a series of controls to make sure that the buildings that are on the site only occupy a certain amount and don't occupy too much of the site. So what the controls for the first 20 feet of the building, the maximum lot coverage is 70%. Does that make sense to people? Once you get above a height of 20 feet to a height of 60 feet, no more than 60% of the development lot can be built on above 60 to 180 feet, 45%, and at the upper levels, only 25%. We have a couple of diagrams to show that, how that would apply to the master plan that Colin had talked about. So this is sort of showing the master plan in a very diagrammatic way. This at the lowest level, the maximum coverage of 70%. The current master plan has a coverage of about 56%. So it sort of shows the difference there. And I think I'm probably in people's way while I'm doing this. Going from 20 to 60%, you can see we get very closer to the coverage. You get 54% for the maximum of 60%. Between 160 and 180, we have a maximum coverage of 45, which is mostly related to the PV canopy. And then at the uppermost portion, where there's an allowance for 25%, the master plan is showing about 7% at this point. Okay. Another control that we wanted to take a look at was heightened setback controls. And under zoning today, again, sort of thinking about your basic block, there's a concept of heightened setback where you establish a maximum street wall height, then there's a required setback, and then development has to fit within something called a sky exposure plane, so that the buildings sort of step back from the street as they move higher. What we wanted to think about was, in order to sort of create the permeability that Colin had talked about, was to think about ways of allowing for some limited encroachments of those areas while ensuring that there was lots of open space around it. So we have a series of controls that allow for some modifications of the heightened setback along the various frontages, while requiring that the heightened setback be respected in other areas. And again, diagrammatically, what we have is a control on the northern portion that no more than 65% of the buildings can be moved outside of the sky exposure plane. And this diagram here, this is sort of showing how the sky exposure plane concept works. So you've got a street wall, you've got a setback, then development would fit within that. So we allow for a encroachment in those areas of up to 65% of that street frontage. Along the eastern and western facades, we allow for an encroachment of up to 35%, and what we're showing here is an encroachment of about 14%. On the west perimeter, again, encroachment